Well, good morning. Thank you for having me here in Calgary. I am honored to be the kickoff speaker for the Soul of the City series here in Calgary. I am part of I am part of a project team by a similar name called Night Soul of the Community Survey. And it's a very interesting name to have and a very interesting concept. And you might struggle sometimes explaining it to others. I know I do sometimes, especially to my 5-year-old. When she asks me, what does mommy do? And I try to explain to her, Soul of the Community, she said, oh, you work with dead places. And, you know, not as much as I used to. And that's the exciting thing about placemaking today, because we are in a bit of a place renaissance. I don't know if you've been aware of that, where people are reprioritizing place like they have never before. People are talking about their interest in having somewhere to live that they want to live, that it's becoming more important to them than just their job. We are finally getting that we are more than our jobs, and that quality of life and having a place that we want to call home is very critical. Therefore, we're hearing a lot more about placemaking, this idea of placemaking. And placemaking is really just about optimizing the place. It's about being who you are, because I will never tell you to be anything but who you are, but be the best who you are that you can be. And there's a real reason and way to go about doing that. Because when you make yourself the best that you can be as a place, you encourage what we call resident attachment. And here's the reality that we're seeing more and more. Loved places do better. Places where people want to be do better in a lot of ways. Not only in macro hard outcomes for places, but also on the micro level as well. One of the big reasons we are having this conversation at all is because of these little economic engines, young talent. In the States, we are seeing poll after poll, and I would guess that it's more common than just in the States, that for the first time in the history that we've cared at all about this kind of thing, we have young people who are now choosing a place over a job. A place over a job. Even saying things like, I will just go and live in the place I want to live, and I'll worry about the job when I get there. That is a radically different way that places have been imagined to this point, where historically we have really just focused on the jobs. Do we have the jobs that folks want in this place? But now we're seeing something a little bit different, because these guys are leading the way. They are forcing us to understand maybe that people go where they want to live, and the jobs follow them. And when we think about how we can redesign and reimagine our places to be the kind of places that young talent would want to come, and most importantly, would want to stay, then you have to start having a completely different kind of conversation about how you present your place, what are the qualities you have in your place, and how people exist within that space. I work a lot with these guys, and it's interesting that a placemaker would be spending a lot of time talking to the corporate sector, as I do in the States and often a lot. And I do so because they have been thinking this way for a while, at least in the States, and I would argue in other places as well. They have already seen the trend when they're trying to recruit young talent, that they're like, here's the job, and it's a great job, and here are your benefits, and then this great. And they're like, where am I living? Where is this job? What's the place? Where am I going to be spending my time? What is there to do there? And I've spoken to quite a few CEOs who say, you know, Katherine, something's different now. It's changing. I used to have to worry about how can I recruit the best talent by giving them a job that they want and being able to sell the job. Now I have to sell places? I have to sell places now. And I don't have time for that. I want to be in places that sell themselves. So how are we working to help places sell themselves in a different way? Well, The Night Soul of the Community project that's been mentioned a couple of times already asks two simple but yet profound questions about place. What makes people love where they live? And why does that matter? Why does that matter? Night took on this idea and funded this initiative in partnership with the Gallup organization to survey 26 US cities over 3 years, speaking to 43,000 people, and truly trying to understand this one simple but yet unasked question to this point. And of the 10 places that we studied about a place, the things that mattered most were social offerings, aesthetics, and openness. The higher people rated those things about their place, the more attached they were to their place. Because placemaking can seem overwhelming. Oh goodness, where do we start? Well, we have a really clear indication where we start. Because your love of place, what makes you proud to live where you live, what you show off about your community is likely the things that attach you to it. And maybe this room is different than others, but I don't think so. Not all of us show the want ads across the breakfast table as a way to say, look how great our economy's doing. What they do instead to show the love of their place, to show off their place, is to say, let me show you this place. And we talk about social offerings, openness, and aesthetics. But the more that you have people who are rating this better in their place and their attachment goes up, we saw something else. The higher the GDP growth of those places. Now, this isn't about rich places doing better. It's not just about that, because in the States right now, I'm in the business of rebuilding economies. And so it's about vitality. Are we getting better? And what we're finding is that communities that had high levels of attachment seem to be somewhat insulated from the economic fallout that a lot of us experienced in the States. And not only that, they seem to recover quicker. What's going on there? Well, you know, a lot of the cities, and I have to also say that this is true for rich cities, poor neighborhoods, the findings are remarkably consistent. Whether you're talking about Macon, Georgia, or Detroit, Michigan, the things that drive attachment remained the same. When economies went from good to horrible, they stayed the same. It was what they say, a groundbreaking finding in the field of place. But also, more importantly, I would say, is that it took community attachment to this touchy-feely kumbaya idea to something that made a hell of a lot of difference, if I can be frank. And it brought people to the table that you couldn't have blasted in before. Because we are starting to connect soft things about place to hard outcomes. And that has really what has transformed this idea and made Soul of the Community a transforming project. But outside of this idea of what drives attachment, we can also look deeper at the attachment levels themselves. And in the US cities, I spend a lot of time helping people unpack this attachment idea. Not only what drives it, but who are they? Who are the attached people in our community? What is the demographic profile of an attached person in a place? And that stays remarkably consistent as well, interestingly enough. Who are not attached? But the other thing that's really worth noticing here, and something that has been really important for us to take that study to the next level, is those numbers that you see across the top, the 3.56, the 3.58, the 3.57. That was the average level of attachment in the 26 places we studied from 2008 to 2010. And it's fun doing media work and working with communications, because every year they're like, oh, the attachment level's the same. There's no story here. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is huge. This is a huge story. Why? Because the attachment levels on average stayed the same across these 26 places, and we all know good and well what was happening to the economies of those places. And if economy and attachment, your own personal, how well I'm doing, and how well I take it out on my city were related. Those things should have been going through the floor. Obviously, something else was driving people's attachment to their place beyond their own personal circumstance. Something else was going on there. And as the research showed, it was these other elements of a place. It's like one resident told me, when everything is so difficult, living in a place you want to live in is like harbor from the storm. There's something that I can relax into, and that is my place. And I think we saw that very clearly showing up in the figures. The other thing that is interesting and worth discussing is this idea of, understanding the demographic breakdowns, but also seeing that 40% of the people we talked to had absolutely no attachment to where they lived. That's a huge number. That's a huge number. 40% of people feel absolutely no connection to where they live. So the first chance, and you would see this, and when you talk to people, you would hear it. People were scared to leave. They couldn't sell their houses. They were scared to leave. They didn't want to leave their jobs. But boy, the moment things get better, I am so out of here. I am so out of here. And the economic folks have been talking for a while about the talent reshift that's happening on the way in the States. And really, as we're in a global competition for talent, I'm seeing cities right now taking a moment to optimize themselves to get ready for the talent reshift that's coming. Because now we get that we can't just talk about job infrastructure. We also have to talk about place in a new way. So that when the young talent starts moving and looking, when we're trying to get people to come to our places, we're going to be judged by a different metric. And those cities that are preparing for that shift, you can see it. You can see it coming. And it also enables me to spend some time with folks and talking about who is it, not only who are your attached, who are your fence sitters, who are those folks who are not attached in your community, but where do you want to invest your energy? Who is it that you really want to go after? Do you want to go hard after the not attached folks, which sometimes can be the young talent force? Because young talent's always thinking about what's next. Is this it for me? I don't know. We'll see. They're not as quick to attach as older folks. Or do you go after the fence sitters, who if you just optimize a couple of things, you would see a shift, a tipping effect, if you will. So it allows us to become very specific in the way that we present and talk about how we really make a difference in our places. Now, this is an example of a tool that we use in the SOUL project. It is called the Strengths and Opportunity Map. And basically what it does, you don't have to really worry if you can't see everything. I just want to show you something for you to better understand how we use this data. Because that's the whole point. If we did this research and it sat on a shelf and I could not go into a community and help them apply it, then that was $2 million down the drain for no reason. So making this research actionable was a high priority for us, and this tool enables us to do this. What this does basically is plot all the things that we ask people about in their city along in quadrants, basically, so that you would find the things that matter most for attaching people to a place. And that's only useful if you know how well you're doing on those things. So it might matter for your attachment, but you're not happy with the way the city's pulling that off right now. And so you have to understand immediately something that I think we forget a lot in placemaking and a lot in community practice and a lot in economic development, which is the importance of starting with the place's strengths and knowing what your strengths are as a place. Because once you start to understand, hey, wait a minute, these are the things that matter for my attachment or matter for residential attachment, and people say we're doing pretty well on things. What about that is happening? Why would people think that we're doing well on social offerings? What is our unique interpretation of social offerings here? Because that's something obviously we need to maximize. We need to do more with that because it's mattering a great deal. And from that, how can we take the things that we're doing well and use them to leverage the things we're not doing so well? Instead of starting a conversation that we often do when we talk about planning for the future, is what we're not getting right. And the cities that I work in have been told chapter and verse what they're not good at. That's not a real mobilizing place to start talking about the future. But instead, starting a conversation about these are the things you are getting right and figuring out how we can leverage them to address the things we're not doing as well brings a community engagement level to a place that I have never seen before. I've worked in community practice since I got out of graduate school and even before I was out of graduate school. And I've worked at, I've run nonprofits, I've worked at foundations, my dissertation was on civic engagement and social capital. I believe in community mobilization. All of that is true. I have never seen something work better to move people from a place of stagnation to optimization like placemaking does. Never. And I think part of the reason behind that is that it's more immediate. It's more immediate. Civic engagement and social capital is one of those things that you work really hard and you build the networks and social trust and encourage people and you hope and you pray and you cross your fingers that in 2 to 3 years the needle will move a little bit and nothing horrible will happen to take the whole thing out. Placemaking and attachment works a little bit differently. If you change people's perceptions of social offerings, openness, and aesthetics, you see same-year differences in attachment. Same-year differences in attachment. That is powerful because it has the ability to change people's relationship with their place that quickly. So how do you discover the soul of your city? Well, the first step is to really examining, uncovering, determining, whatever verb you want to use, your place's identity. Placemaking is actually rooted in a widely accepted and adopted place identity or community narrative. Community narrative answers questions like, what is our identity as a place? What is our unique advantage? What do we have that other people don't? Many cities have no idea. No idea because they never asked the question. It's kind of like we're all in a relationship with our place. Dare I say a marriage, because I don't know if it's a marriage for a lot of us, but for some of us it is. We are all in relationship with place. And a lot of times we make a long-term commitment to a place without knowing the place that we're committing to. Because the place doesn't really know, and neither do we. We'll get there and we'll figure it out and hope for the best. So it's sort of an arranged marriage, if you will. And once we get in there, we have to better understand, is this place a match for me? What place identity allows places to do is really understand its own identity and narrative as its place so it can be presented. So those who would be naturally a good fit, a good match for this place can come in and not only get their needs met from a place, but become rooted to the place itself. Because they feel like, we've all been in places where you walk in there and you go, I could live here. You just kind of, in other places where you feel like, am I jet lagged or am I just really feeling a dissonance here? What you're reacting to is the feeling, the identity of the place that you're experiencing. So a lot of places, when we talk about placemaking, go on to start with activities. We'll do this, and we'll do that, and we'll do this, and it'll be great. And they don't see the shift that they expected. Why? Because their efforts in placemaking aren't rooted in any kind of narrative. It's not coming from a place of understanding, why did we do this festival, and why did we redevelop this way versus another way? And what place identity allows you to do is figure out what is the guidance that we need here. The other thing that happens a lot is people just copy off each other's paper. This worked in New York, so we're going to try it here in Wichita. Things that work in one place should not work in another place. Because what we are trying to design are not cookie-cutter communities, but places that are their optimized self. And if you are going to create a place that is a true reflection of your authentic narrative, then whatever you see happening over there that goes off like gangbusters isn't for you to adopt right out of the package. It has to be translated through the narrative of your place. The third thing I see an awful lot is that people say, well, we have an identity. We get it. It sounds like we hit the club in here. Sorry, guys. So they going to take this thing off in a minute. Okay, sounds like they cut me off anyway, so I'll talk louder. Here we go. They say we have an identity, and there you go. What is it? We have one. We have an identity. What is it? Well, on Tuesday, it's the place of opportunity. On Thursday, it's what is it? Something else. You can see when it's not really a reflective of an authentic existence of a place. And so you can't skip the step. You can't just copy someone else's. And you can't just sort of say, well, we have one, but we're working on that. And I'll admit, it's hard work. It's not something you can do in an afternoon. But how do you do it? Well, unpacking or discovering your identity really comes from something very specific. If you were going to have to describe your spouse to someone, maybe that's not a good example. If you were going to have to describe your 12th grade teacher to someone, how would you do it? How would you do it? Well, in all likelihood, one of the things that you would talk about are the values and characteristics of that person. You would talk about the way that they were, the things that they valued, the things that they taught you, the things that you felt reflected back to you from them. And you would probably talk about physical things about them. She was really tall. She had, when I think Megan was looking for me this morning, she goes, I was just looking for a girl with big brown hair. You know, there are these things that you think you know about a person physically, and that is part of how you sort of define it. So how would you describe it? Are you old and established? Are you new and free, where you see innovation running free? Are you transforming? Are you in this place of really becoming something else? Because our values and characteristics, who we are as people, are not that different from places. They come from a myriad of sources. Personal history, the geography, the industries there, the anchor institutions, the landmarks, the culture and the spirit, all of that comes into play to create values and characteristics that derive your identity. You are not just your industry. You are not just your history. You are not just those things. And a lot of people get very caught up in that. But because, well, we're this and we're also that. Of course you are. Of course you are. Because underneath that are the values and characteristics that have created who you are. Mark Twain wrote in 1899, in Boston they ask, how much does he know? In New York they ask, how much is he worth? In Philadelphia they ask, who were his parents? 2012, that's still pretty true. That it's very an accurate depiction of the values held by a place. Is it a hard-working value? Is it an innovation value? What are the things that derive your identity as a place? And once you establish that, you have to show your identity. You have to show your identity. You have to manifest your identity on the ground in the places that we live. This is a picture from an annual Iron Bridge dinner that they do in Massachusetts. It's an example of showing their identity as a place, in this case a landmark that's very meaningful to them, as the basis for a unique social offering that they give in the community every year. And it's really to promote social cohesion and rootedness to place. Because you are in a setting where you are forced to enjoy the place. They set it up that way. And every year it sells out, every year, because it's a resident thing, and the day they have it, the day afterwards, it sells out for next year. How could you go to this and not be a little more in love with your place the next day? And what will that love inspire you to do for that place tomorrow? This is how you start to take a place and a person in a place from being every man for himself to being invested in a place. So, showing identity. Let me build this out for you. So we talked about placemaking, which is the optimization of places. Be who you are, but be the best who you are that you can be. And how, because we have this reprioritization of place, people are focusing on, how do we do that? How do we do that? Let's do things. Let's do things. But placemaking without a sense of identity is a problem and something that we have to work on. Now let me tell you something else, and maybe you've heard about this in places, I don't know. You can also be in a place where there is a shared identity, but it's not rooted to the place. So people use the place and they move on. Because their ability to feel connected have to do with we're all here for the same thing, but it does not transfer to a loyalty for the place. So when they have gotten what they've needed, they will move on from it. And what placemaking can do is take a place that might already have an identity and figure out how to root it into the place. Well, still, how do you know where to start with that? Well, again, like I showed before, what we have been able to show is that if you can take your identity as a place and manifest it through social offerings, openness, and aesthetics, that is where you start. And we're going to go through some of those and talk a little bit about each. But that is the formula for placemaking, which will again inspire the attachment that we're looking for, which has some economic and some other benefits that we've already discussed. So it seems like a simple equation, but it is an equation that requires a lot of work and a lot of thought. But you don't just do everything anywhere you can think of. You have to be deliberate and strategic in how you approach it. So, yeah, sign me up for this immediately. The Calgary Stampede, social offerings. This looks amazing to me. Anyway, consistently, the number one thing that attaches people to place is their perception of social offerings, and that they're decent social offerings. Social offerings is about the opportunities for positive social interaction in a place. So often these are the things you might expect. Do we have the availability of people, fun things to do, things like that? Do we have special events that people like? But it's also the non-traditional things. It's also things like, do we have walkable neighborhoods? Is there an opportunity for people to pass each other on foot to create social networks above and beyond the third spaces that we have in our places? One of the things Gallup showed in other research that they did is that the number of people in a neighborhood, the higher the number of pet dog owners, the lower the crime. Because when you own a pet, or especially a dog, if you can get your cat to walk on a leash, you're a better person than I, or your gerbil or your parakeet or anything else, but dog walkers in particular have to walk their dog. And when you're out on the street more, there are more feet on the ground. That not only encourages what we would call non-traditional social interaction, that's not happening in a bar, in a nightclub, or even a festival, but it's happening on the street. And the more that you have those networks compounded with a presence outside of our doors, outside of our walls, the better it is for place. These are the kinds of places where crime has a hard time growing because the people won't have it. Why? Because they have established through formal and informal networks the opportunities for positive social interaction that has not only bonded them to each other, but to the place itself. So how can we take our community identity and manifest that through social offerings? That is the placemaking question. How do we take this soul of the city, this identity that we have, and translate it through social offerings? It is very important to remember, cautionary tale, that what happens within those social spaces is very critical. You can't just create social infrastructure without being mindful of what happens within those spaces. Because perceptions of social offerings comes from two sources. It's not just the social interaction, it's also about the civility of how people treat each other within those spaces. So let me give you some examples. There are places that have tremendous social opportunities, tremendous. The city provides tremendous through government, private, you name it, tremendous social opportunities. But what happens in those spaces is not always very positive. And there is an overall perception that we don't care about each other in those spaces. That downgrades the whole thing. The whole thing. So I used to live until about 8 weeks ago in Miami, Florida. We have social opportunities like you would not believe. But we don't believe that we care about each other very much there. And our attachment takes a hit because of it. So you have to be very careful and deliberate in how you build these spaces. There are also spaces that are places that we've studied, like Aberdeen and Grand Forks, Wichita, where there's not a ton of social infrastructure, but boy, do they love each other, care about each other, do anything for each other. And it's sort of like they have gone around the fact that they can't have the social infrastructure and have almost replaced it with a civility that is unbelievable. So what we're trying to achieve is social interaction and infrastructure without the cost of civility. And that in itself can be tricky. You know, I have one of the mayors that I work with in the States tells me that, he told me the story about how his city was being considered for a new site for this corporation. And unbeknownst to him, representatives from the corporation just showed up in his city. Unannounced, didn't tell him, just showed up there. And, you know, before they came, they looked at the tax incentives, they crunched the numbers, because of course they still do that. But then they showed up there. They didn't tell the mayor, they just showed up. And they checked out the waterways, checked out the parks, checked out the green spaces, checked out the downtown. Then they went to the Little League game to see how parents dealt with each other in that setting. They went to the grocery store and would accidentally ram into another person's cart to see what kind of reaction they would get. I'm sorry, that was my fault. No, it was my fault. Or, what did you just do to me? And probably my favorite is that they would sit at green lights and wait to see how long it took the person behind them to start honking. And he says, and you know what, Catherine? I said, what? He goes, they're all doing this. I'm talking to other mayors and they're showing up in our places and then they tell me after the fact. He says, so the next time I have to give a speech about economic development, I'm going to be talking about not honking at green lights. It is my economic development strategy. So don't be surprised that happens to you. So the question really becomes, how is our narrative reflected in the civility that we show each other? You know, I have community foundations that they have huge initiatives just based on civility. Because we, again, are being judged by a different metric. And it's not always the traditional ones that we have paid attention to. But as mayors and other community leaders are seeing, it is part of the metric that they're being judged to determine their economic future. Because the young talent's asking this question, this corporation, and they need to be able to sell the place. It all starts coming full circle. Aesthetics. How do we honor our green spaces and develop the rest? This is the thing behind social offerings that matters the most in attaching people to where they live. 26 places, 3 years, 43,000 people. And it's interesting because in the States, this is what can be easily forgotten and budgeted out the first time we hit any kind of economic crisis. This is what's on the chopping block. But the fact is that this corresponds to a tremendous level of enjoyment and pride by residents. And it does not matter. I did some additional research for a university in Charlotte because what they wanted to study was around the university some disadvantaged neighborhoods to see if this stuff would hold. You know, really test this. If you are living in a disadvantaged area, do these things change? Do what drives your attachment change? It does not change. It does not matter the amount of money that you have or don't have. Everybody needs to feel proud of where they live. And of course, our scales could be radically different depending on our means. But it doesn't change. It doesn't all of a sudden become safety or potholes. It does become, when I wake up in the morning, I don't see graffiti. And that's another part of aesthetics. It's not just how pretty it is, but the elimination of blight and decay. You got to start somewhere. And in some places, it is that elimination where we have to start. So how does our identity manifest through our natural and our built spaces? That's the placemaking question. And how can we highlight that? How can that become more front and center to us? Instead of, and we have that too. Because if nothing else, what research like Soul of the Community and other research projects have done is earned place a seat at the table of economic development. It should not drive the bus. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, your job, it doesn't matter, none of that other stuff. All you need to care about is, but I'm telling you that these things now need to become part of the conversation. Not take over the conversation, but be a part of the conversation. So certainly not be the first thing we budget out the first time that we are having some sort of economic stress. The thing that behind social offerings, aesthetics, is openness. Openness is really about how comfortable everybody feels in their own skin in your place. And when we studied openness and welcomeness in Soul of the Community, we didn't just talk about disenfranchised groups. Because our goal should not be welcomeness to some. Our goal should be welcomeness to all, because that's what creates a culture of where everybody has a place here. I am not going to tell you, go after certain groups more than these are more disenfranchised. That is a social issue concern. But from a placemaking perspective, what you're trying to elevate is that there are opportunities for whether you're minority, immigrant, young talent, young single, family with young children, elderly person. These are all the things we ask people about in Soul, because we're trying to figure out what is the fabric of this place around welcomeness. Do we support that here? And this is much more than tolerance. We specifically ask, how welcoming is this city for this person, this kind of person, this kind of... Because tolerance means I put up with you. Welcomeness means, please come. We have businesses, services, opportunities that would meet your needs. It's a higher metric, and that's why a lot of communities struggle with this. It's much harder to do. And yet, young people in particular really want to live in a place where they think that this is happening. They really need to believe that they're accepted and their neighbors are accepted as well. So how do we manifest our identity through an openness lens? How do we send that message or not send that message? Do we do some better with some groups than others? That is a reality. Part of your narrative and your identity as a place is historically we have appealed to this group more than this group. And that's okay, but the job should be to really try to optimize that as much as you can. So I told you that we asked about welcomeness to minorities, immigrants, gays and lesbians, senior citizens, young talent, singles, families with young children. Any guess on who is perceived to be the least welcome group in 26 American cities? Young talent. And boy, was that was rough. That was a rough finding. Consistently, what we saw in all of the cities that we studied over 3 years, except for 2 places, young talent was perceived as the least welcome group. And it's not interesting because something very interesting is happening with that question. When you ask somebody 30 years and older, is this place welcoming to young talent? The first thing they do to assess that question is the first thing they think about, the availability of jobs. Job, 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 job. When you ask somebody 30 years and younger, is this place welcoming for young talent? The first thing they do to assess that is think about the place. They think about these other things. So what we would have sometimes is a tale of 2 cities, where the young people were like, yeah, it's not so bad here. And the people who judged it based on jobs were like, oh, no. We're not welcoming here. And in some places, you'd have a complete convergence. The young people, as well as everybody else, said, no, not good here for that. So again, when we talk about the need for the retention and the selection of young talent to keep them in our places, you have to also understand this whole idea around how we judge who's welcome here and who's not, and some surprises that you find along the way. Oh, the two cities that did not have young talent as the least welcome group were Charlotte, North Carolina, and Boulder, Colorado. Not Detroit, not Miami. It was a very big surprise and a very interesting conversation that we're actually still having. So I did want to share with you a couple of ideas and examples today. These are really for inspiration and not replication. Because as I just said, if I come and I find out some of these things have been plopped down in here, I'm going to know that nobody listened to me, and that's going to break my heart. After I blew my eardrums out, talking to y'all and everything. I'm from North Carolina, so the y'all sneaks out. The best ideas, frankly, that I've come across, and part of this is an economic imperative, because in the cities that I work in, I'm greeted at the office in the city hall by the mayor, who says, "Please, Catherine, do not tell me I have to build a performing arts center, because I cannot build a performing arts center. I don't have the capital for that. They will run me out of town. So don't come here telling me that." And luckily, I don't, because what I believe in as really being a good place to start are the lighter, cheaper, quicker ideas, as we call them. And these are almost always resident-led. They don't usually come out of City Hall. They usually come out of the residents themselves, which really actually make them even better to me. They're always unique to the place. You will see the narrative reflected in the in the actual activity itself. And they're easy to implement and sustain. This isn't something that requires, an act of Congress to pull off. And that's usually the way that they need to work for our places. The first one that I wanted to talk to you guys about is in St. Louis. It's something called Group Hug. The other thing I have to say about placemaking examples is that they usually fall into two categories. They're either about uplifting ourselves as a place, remembering why it's great to be somewhere, or they try to solve a problem. So I'm going to start with Group Hug, which is really a way to lift up what's good about a place. And often placemaking starts here. Because the story of St. Louis is very similar to the story of a lot of places around the country and around the world, in that they started an economic development strategic revisioning. And they all sat in a room, and the leaders got together and they sat in a room and they were like, well, the strategic plan better address this problem, and it better address that problem, and it better address that problem. And people started not coming to these meetings, and it got worse, and because, God, I just don't want to hear about this anymore. And then, of course, somebody said, of course, and now we have to engage the residents in the strategic planning visioning. And we don't want to come to these meetings. So how in the world are we going to pull this off? And somebody, a hero, a local hero, I don't know who it was, said, wait a minute. There's lots of great things about living here. Yeah, we have all this. But I think maybe what we need to do is start at a place where we try to remember what's great about where we live as a point of departure for thinking about our future. I think we're doing this backwards. And maybe that's a way to help with resident engagement, because we're quite so burnt out with this at this point, we're going to have a hard time remembering what's great about living in this place. And so they encouraged residents they created a website, it's called Group Hug. They encourage residents to go around the city and post pictures of things that you love about living in St. Louis. And there was a competition, and there was a cash prize given out for the picture that was voted, because they displayed them in downtown. And so there was a cash prize given out for the picture that received the most votes. And it was such an interesting journey for this city, it became a documentary, where people started, this crew came in and they sort of tracked, well, how did you decide, and the conversations people were having in the downtown about what picture, what they were going to show, as why they loved living in St. Louis. And so you see everything from, in the pictures there, the lady who loves the bike lane. I was in Red Deer yesterday, and I don't know if y'all know about the bike lane, controversy of Red Deer. I was very tempted to ride in there on a bike, because I was pretty sure I would be shot upon entering. But they put a bike lane in, and people were like, what the hell is this? And then they took out the bike lane, and people were like, why'd you succumb to those people? And they were like, it was a bike lane. And my cab driver in Red Deer took out a map, and he said, because he was like, he found out I was there to talk with the city and whatever, and he took out a map. He was like, okay, let me tell you how they screwed this up. This used to be a place I could turn. And I'm sitting in this cab going, I just got up at 3:30 in the morning in North Carolina. I'm just getting here, and I'm sitting here trying to really pay. And now it's a bike lane. And now I have to switch lanes mid-intersection for the bike lane. And now they took the bike lane out. And then so I was reading this blog, and they're like, they're bringing in the American Katherine Loflin to tell us that we have to have a bike lane. And I was like, oh, God, the American. God, it's right in the heart. But anyway, that's okay. So they were very delighted about this bike lane. And it is a story, and I don't mind telling you because I think they came to a different place about it in Red Deer yesterday. You can't just throw something out there without really saying, because when we talked about yesterday, they talked about, we have an environmental, we have this need to be environmentally aware. And as part of, we understand we take a lot from the land. We want to give back to the land. This was a manifestation of us recognizing that fact. They didn't say any of that. They just threw out a bike lane. And people were like, I can't turn, the cab drivers are mad. And then they pulled it out, and people are like, you need to have a backbone. So, back to St. Louis, where the bike lane, everybody was quite delighted, actually, with the bike lane. And public art, there's a lady having a personal moment with her public art. You just got to be flexible with these things. You never know what you're going to get. A young lady who loves the little splash parks in the downtown, an older man who loves his local pizza, things like that, public transit, on and on. And it was a tremendous opportunity for this particular initiative to start at a different place than it was going to start otherwise. And it galvanized people to invest and to dig into a place. Because when you feel like your personal future is tied to the outcome of the place, you do a hell of a lot more to make sure it succeeds. And what this enabled people to do is to remember why it is their personal futures are tied to the outcome of this place. And remember, in case we've forgotten. This is an example, it's actually a problem-solving example from Macon, Georgia, called Making Money. I don't know if any of you guys might have heard about this idea. This was really an attempt of the community there who recognized sort of what I mentioned earlier. We kind of have an identity, but we have our fair share of challenges, and our identity isn't necessarily as rooted into the place as we would like. We need to figure out a way, because it's a southern community, a rural southern community. We have race issues, we have equity issues, we have issues. And what we need to really try to figure out as a place is how can we network and bond not only more with each other, but to establish roots that have something to do with this place. So they decided to make their own money, as we have a tendency to do in my country. Especially when we don't have any. But they did it, and they had good intentions, so you give them a pass for that. So what they did is they created these denominations that, as you can see down the center, had symbols that were meaningful to that place. So the peach tree, the architecture, the butterflies, that's some of the things that are the symbols that they have adopted as part of their identity as a place. And they tore them in half, and they distributed the denominations separately. And the goal was to find your match, right, in the place. And they created these community events that were designed to help you find your match. In the downtown, at the library, do all this stuff. But the amazing thing that happened in this place is that this wasn't people sitting in a room 6 hours talking about race relations. This wasn't about people saying, we need to be kinder to each other. This was a game that happened in a community that was designed to get at those other things. And because I think the way it was designed as a game, find your match, that's the goal. Not, bond with somebody that is different than you. It went off like gangbusters. And so even though they had these community events where you were supposed to find your match, people were walking up and down in the cafe going, I got peach, column, star, anybody in church, at the workplace. It became part of the culture of the place. And that's when you know you've done something. Because when it doesn't, oh, we got to go to the meeting where we find the match. You know, when it's really part of the cultural identity of a place, you've done something important. Now, when you found your match, you would meet somebody that maybe you would have met or not known otherwise, and you could decide whether to spend your money separately or together at a local business. So you go full circle with the economy. This idea has won international gaming awards because it's about the game of putting people together, but we all know it's more than a game. But the innovativeness and the simplicity behind it is what makes it powerful. My last example that I'm going to give today has to do with Buffalo, New York, and the Erie Canal waterfront in Buffalo. This was an area that was the source of a lot of industrialization that has now become blight, a lot of contamination of the waterfront itself. And it hasn't been used, obviously, for a long time by residents. It was not the place to be, you know, if you will, in Buffalo. So a local businessman who attended, I don't know if they forced him, I don't know how they got him there, forced him to attend. He was at a placemaking workshop because he was intrigued by this idea that if you send a signal to people that this is a place to enjoy, they will do it. That it's really that simple. That you just manifest your identity, you take things about your place that make you memorable and you raise them up. Is it really, that's all there is? Because I spend $20 million to redevelop my downtown. Well, there might be some to that. But he wanted to test this idea of, can it be that simple? So he went and he painted Adirondack chairs. That's it. He cleared out the mess. There's still the blighted buildings. He didn't tear those down. He just painted chairs, cleaned out the garbage, and put the chairs out and walked away. And walked away. And the news folks, you know, saw, because he was a pretty prominent businessman. The news, he was written up in the paper, you know, and they're like, he has, let's see here, he's put some chairs out, and that's his going to try to develop the waterfront. And, you know, everybody was just sort of, okay, we'll see. And even he was like, well, I don't know, we're going to try it. So after the first couple of days, the story was out in the paper, a couple of people showed up to enjoy the sunset because, sorry, one of the things that people had forgotten about Buffalo because they had been living in this situation for so long is that in the summer, the sunset over the water is quite spectacular. And when they saw that the chairs were out, it was inviting them to enjoy the space. They did, you know, a few people. The next night, more people came out. Next night, family showed up with the kids and the bikes and all of that. And then about probably the second week, the dreaded balloon vendor showed up, right, for the kids. Every parent's nightmare. And then the hot dog vendor. So the business, they were like, well, you know, where are we going to set up shop? Well, you know, everybody heads down to the waterfront on those painted chairs at sunset. During the day, they're starting to come out too. They're having play dates out there. And by the third week or so, you know, they started having sunset yoga, and they started having, you know, day-long, hey, we should have a little festival here, and let's have the kids' birthday party here, and hey, let's do this, and hey, let's do that. And now, this is the waterfront. It's also a cautionary tale. Be careful what you wish for, because you might be successful at it. So this businessman flippantly said, I redeveloped our waterfront for $300. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. Who's laughing now? And so now it has really become a destination, not only for Erie, and they're still working at it. You know, this is always a work in progress, but not only just for Erie, but for the region. And when people react to it, they say, God, that's in Buffalo? Yeah, that's in Buffalo. So it can be simple. It's not always simple, but it can be that simple. So I congratulate you for starting this series. I think this is an exciting thing. You're on a journey of discovery about place. You will be better for doing it. It is a journey, though, for understanding who you are as a place, understanding your narrative, and most importantly, keep that sacred as you continue to develop smart and thoughtfully. When people get nervous about change in communities, when people get nervous about development in communities. What they are worried about is losing something about their place that they value. And that is some part of the narrative that means something to them. If you can make a covenant with your places by discovering the soul of the cities, by saying, we get it. We know that these are the things that you value about this place, and we promise you that we will hold it sacred while we continue to modernize in a responsible way. You will see people exhale. I promise. And conversations that seem to have been entracted for years and years and years will suddenly relax a little bit. But you got to keep your word, and you got to do the work. Thank you very much.